Welcome to Justice Reloaded HD. Before we dive in, let me ask you something simple. Are you carrying something too heavy today? If so, take a deep breath and let it go for just a moment. Because in today's story, you'll meet a woman who didn't just lift a child. She lifted a heart that had been too afraid to be held. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly the kind of reminder you need right now. If you believe in the quiet power of kindness, if stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things move you, then go ahead and hit that like button, and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Every week, we share something warm, something real, and something worth remembering. The cafe was small, just off Pearl Street in Boulder, Colorado. Warm wooden floors creaked with each footstep, and the low ceiling hugged the room in a kind of cozy silence only found in places that knew their regulars by name. The scent of brewed coffee and sizzling bacon clung to the air like memory. A bell jingled softly as the front door swung open, and in rolled a wheelchair, pushed slowly by a tall man in a charcoal gray coat. Thomas Whitmore glanced around the diner. His eyes, stern and calculating, the kind that had once built an education empire from scratch, seemed strangely out of place in this humble setting. But it wasn't business that brought him here. It was the boy in the chair. Eli was 8. His legs were thin, unmoving, tucked carefully beneath a navy fleece blanket. His hands gripped the armrests, not from cold, but from tension, from habit. His gaze was lowered, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. There was only one low table left, and it was taken. The rest were high booths, each with tall stools that towered above Eli's sitting height. Thomas hesitated, staring at the options. He was used to solving problems with contracts and capital, but this was something else. He reached to help his son, but Eli recoiled slightly, just enough to send a silent message Thomas had long stopped trying to decode. The boy didn't want to be lifted. Not by him. Not by anyone. And then, from across the room, she appeared. "Hi there," said a soft voice. A young woman stepped into view, black apron, order pad in hand, eyes gentle but sharp. Rachel Nguyen. The name on her tag was faded, but her presence was clear as day. She crouched down slowly, bringing herself to Eli's eye level, not as a waitress, not as a helper, but as a human being. "Hey," she said with a smile that didn't push, didn't demand. "Would it be okay if I helped you up to the table? I know a way that doesn't hurt backs. Or pride." Eli looked at her. Really looked. There was no pity in her face, only a quiet respect that said you're in charge here. A few seconds passed. Then, he nodded. With practiced hands and a tenderness that only came from caring for someone who couldn't walk, her grandfather, she'd later mention, Rachel positioned her arms gently around him. One smooth motion. No jerks. No panic. Just presence. And just like that, Eli was on the stool. He didn't flinch. Didn't wince. His body remained calm. His breath steady. Thomas stared, frozen not by what had just happened, but by what didn't happen. No protest. No embarrassment. Just a child allowing himself, for the first time in years, to be helped. Rachel gave a small nod, more to Eli than to his father, and stepped back without ceremony. "I'll be right back with some menus," she said, as if this moment hadn't just shifted something deep in the room. Thomas sat down slowly, eyes still on her retreating figure. For years, he'd spent fortunes on the best therapists, the top-rated specialists. But not one of them had ever managed what that quiet young woman just did in 10 seconds, with no title, no clipboard, no promises. And somewhere deep in his chest, a question stirred. Who is she? It happened on a Wednesday morning. The cafe was busier than usual, locals escaping the autumn chill, sipping hot coffee, boots tapping against the wood floors. Thomas had hoped for the low table by the window, the only one Eli could access without assistance. But someone else had claimed it, a young couple laughing over shared pancakes, oblivious. All that remained were high booths with bar-height stools. Thomas scanned the room, frustration creeping in. He didn't like feeling helpless, especially not in front of his son. He knelt beside Eli's wheelchair and whispered, "We'll figure it out." But Eli shook his head slightly. His small fingers tightened on the wheels. He wasn't going to ask to be lifted, not again. Not here. The memory of being hoisted like baggage in public spaces still clung to him. The looks. The awkwardness. The shame. Thomas opened his mouth to try again, and that's when she appeared. Rachel. She'd been clearing a table nearby, but the moment she saw the hesitation in the boy's body and the quiet panic in the father's eyes, she walked over. She didn't speak to Thomas. She crouched low, until she was eye to eye with Eli. Her voice was soft, sure. "Mind if I try helping you up there?" she asked, one eyebrow raised gently. "I promise, I know how to do it without hurting your back. Or your pride." Eli looked at her for a long second. Then, too. Something in her expression, calm, kind, without pity, made him nod. She moved with purpose. No hesitation. No fuss. One arm behind his shoulders, the other under his knees, her body aligning like muscle memory. In one smooth, practiced motion, she lifted him, not like a burden, not like a task, but like someone who respected the space he took up in the world. Eli didn't stiffen. He didn't wince. He simply breathed. And Thomas, he just stared. Because in that single quiet act, he saw something he hadn't seen in years. His son allowing someone in. Not out of need, but out of trust. Rachel wasn't expecting to see him again. The next morning, she had just tied on her apron when the front door chimed, and there he was. Same gray coat. Same posture that looked like he carried the weight of the world on his back. And behind him, the boy. Eli. Tucked into his chair with that quiet expression she hadn't been able to forget. Thomas didn't order coffee. Didn't ask for a table. He stood at the counter and looked straight at her. "My son hasn't let anyone lift him since he was 5, he said without preamble. "You did something no one's been able to do. I'd like to ask if you'd consider helping, a few more times." Rachel blinked. She wasn't used to people like him, people with power in their voice, money in their watchband, and urgency they tried to hide behind formality. "I'm not a therapist," she said slowly, wiping her hands on a towel. "I know. I work double shifts here most days. I can make it worth your time." Rachel didn't answer right away. Something about this man made her hesitate, not because she was afraid, but because she knew he wasn't asking lightly. He didn't seem like the kind of man who liked needing help. She smiled, polite but non-committal. "Let me think about it." He gave a short nod, said nothing more, and turned to go. That evening, after the lunch rush, Rachel found a small envelope tucked behind the counter. It was plain white. No name on the front. Just her initials written in shaky pencil. Inside was a folded note, on lined paper from a child's notebook. "You lifted me like I was normal. Eli." Rachel stared at the words for a long time. Her eyes misted, but she didn't blink them away. She ran her thumb over the indentations the pencil had left in the page, as if trying to hold the boy's voice in her hands. She thought about her grandfather, how she used to lift him after his stroke, how he'd thank her not with words but with the quiet dignity he kept, even in his weakest moments. She remembered the weight of those moments more than the weight of his body. That kind of lifting, it stayed with you. Rachel didn't take the job because of the billionaire's offer. She didn't care much for status or salary, or what kind of car someone drove. She said yes because a little boy in a wheelchair told her she made him feel normal. And that was worth more than any paycheck. She folded the note carefully, tucked it into her pocket, and whispered to herself, "Guess I'm not just a waitress after all." The next day, she showed up at the Whitmore estate. No fanfare. No makeup. Just strong arms, steady hands, and a heart that had remembered how good it felt to be useful, for the right reasons. Every afternoon, just after 3, Rachel walked up the stone pathway to the Whitmore estate. The iron gate always opened before she knocked, as if the house already knew who it was waiting for. Inside, the halls were silent, spotless, and far too large for the small boy who lived there. She found Eli most days in the sunroom, where the afternoon light slanted in like golden ribbons across the floor. The first time she came, he barely looked up. By the third day, he was waiting with a small notebook in hand, questions scribbled in uneven letters. How do I move from this chair to the couch without falling? Can I ever sit on a swing again? Rachel didn't bring games or therapy manuals. She brought time, and intention, and a kind of care that didn't announce itself. They started small. She taught him how to shift his weight and brace his arms on the armrest, then guided him through a slow, clumsy movement from wheelchair to wooden stool. Eli winced, missed, tried again, but she didn't flinch, didn't swoop in to rescue. She let him try, let him fail, and then taught him how to adjust. Soon, the sessions expanded. She placed his homework on the taller counter instead of the coffee table, showed him how to anchor his elbows to give himself height and balance. It's not just about reaching, she said gently, it's about knowing you can. Then came the staircase. They sat at the bottom step, Rachel cross-legged beside him on the marble floor. Close your eyes, she said one afternoon, and imagine each step, not just as something to conquer, but as something already under your feet. She called it the invisible climb. One step in his mind, one breath at a time. With each session, Eli began to see movement differently, not as something he lacked, but something he could approach in new ways. But the real shift wasn't in his muscles. It was in his voice. For the first time in years, Eli began to ask, "Can you help me with this? Can we try again? Will you stay a little longer?" Rachel noticed it immediately. The questions weren't out of desperation, they were out of trust. That kind of asking? It was rare. It meant he no longer saw help as humiliation. It meant he didn't feel broken in front of her. She never made a big deal out of the progress. Neither did Eli. But Thomas noticed. From the doorway, from the landing above, from his quiet office across the hall, he watched his son transform. Slowly, gently. Not because someone was fixing him, but because someone had dared to believe he wasn't broken to begin with. Thomas had always believed in expertise. Degrees. Certifications. References with gold-lettered headers. In his world, solutions came from specialists, and progress was measured in charts. So when he first allowed Rachel into their home, it was meant to be temporary, a gesture of curiosity, not commitment. But something about her presence kept undoing everything he thought he knew. He watched from a distance. Sometimes from the upstairs hallway, sometimes behind the sliding glass door that led to the garden. He never interfered. He just listened. To Eli's laugh, which was so rare it sounded foreign at first. To Rachel's voice, calm and patient, never condescending. To the silence between them, comfortable, respectful, unforced. He saw how she knelt beside Eli instead of towering over him. How she let him struggle, but never alone. How she asked before she touched his wheelchair, his books, his space. And that's when it hit him. His son didn't need sympathy. He needed someone who wasn't afraid to treat him like a full person. Someone who dared to touch his world without gloves of caution or pity. Not once had Rachel spoken about Eli's condition. She never used that word. She spoke about possibility. About strength. About trying again. One afternoon, as Thomas stood by the kitchen entrance, he heard the sharp clack of heels approaching. Marlene, the household assistant, stopped beside him, arms crossed, lips tight. "She's not qualified," she said quietly. "I've worked here long enough to know this family doesn't take chances on amateurs." Thomas didn't respond right away. "She's a waitress," Marlene added. "You should be hiring a pediatric therapist. Someone trained." Thomas turned to her then, Eyes steady, voice low. A specialist can teach my son how to shift from chair to stool, he said. They can teach him how to stretch his muscles, improve his balance, maybe even climb 2 steps on a board. He paused. His gaze drifted toward the living room, where Rachel was showing Eli how to open a stubborn jar, his small hands clenched in determination, her hands hovering nearby, not guiding, just waiting. But who, he said, almost to himself now, will teach my son what it feels like to trust another human being? Marlene didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence between them said enough. Thomas knew he hadn't hired a professional. He'd invited something rarer into his home. Someone who saw his child, not his diagnosis. And for the first time in years, he wasn't second-guessing that choice. It started with a headline. A blurry video, 30 seconds long, uploaded without context. A waitress lifting a child from his wheelchair with practiced grace. Her smile was calm. The boy's face was trusting. In the background, the faint edge of a man's coat, recognizable to those who had followed Thomas Whitmore's name in business magazines and school reform panels. Someone added a title in bold white letters. Billionaire lets waitress handle his disabled son. Where are the professionals? Within hours, it was everywhere. Shared. Commented. Criticized. Not for the kindness it captured, but for the question it implied. Who was this woman? And what was she doing with someone like his son? Thomas first saw it while scrolling through an email chain. At first, he stared at the thumbnail, confused. Then he clicked. Watched. And something inside him cracked, not because of what he saw, but because of what the world was saying about it. They didn't see the gentle hands, the unspoken trust, the unmeasured progress. They saw scandal. They saw failure. They saw a powerful man being careless. His mind, trained by years of protecting assets and legacy, did what it always did, shut down vulnerability. Doubt crept in like smoke under a door. Had she known someone was filming? Had this all been part of something else? Was this exposure? By the time Rachel arrived at the house that afternoon, the gate didn't open. She stood outside for a while, unsure. She rang once. Then twice. No answer. It wasn't until the following day that a plain envelope arrived at the cafe where she worked. No note. No explanation. Just her schedule, cancelled. Her access, revoked. Rachel didn't cry. She didn't call. She didn't beg. Instead, she walked to the edge of the Whitmore property, left a folded piece of paper with the guard, and asked him to hand it to Mr. Whitmore. It read, "I never lifted that boy to be seen. I lifted him because he finally let someone in. I didn't carry him with my arms. I carried him with trust. It's just a shame his father didn't believe in that part." She signed it with a small R. Then she walked away. Thomas read the note in his study, alone. His hands shook slightly. He couldn't stop replaying the video, not the moment itself, but the firestorm around it. The headlines. The public gaze. He told himself he was protecting Eli. That distancing the boy from Rachel was the safer, more responsible path. But something about her words kept pulling at him. I didn't carry him with my arms. I carried him with trust. And for the first time, he didn't know how to argue with that. Because deep down he knew. He hadn't just severed a connection. He had broken something his son was only beginning to build. The truth came quietly, not with headlines or apologies, but with a single phone call from a journalist Thomas trusted. It wasn't her, the voice said plainly. The video was shot by another customer. Posted without her knowing. She had nothing to do with it. Thomas leaned back in his leather chair, the weight of the truth pressing harder than the lie ever had. He hung up, then sat in silence, the walls of his study closing in like slow regret. But the damage had already reached the place it hurt most. Eli had stopped eating. He refused the nurse's help, turned away from a physical therapist, and wouldn't speak when spoken to. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just shut down. Like someone had flipped the switch on the little bit of light he'd started to carry. Thomas tried to reason with him. Bribed him with new books, offered his favorite puzzles, even promised a trip to the mountains. But Eli barely looked at him. The wheelchair stayed still. The boy in it stayed smaller than Thomas had remembered. Days passed. One night, after another silent dinner and a hallway too quiet, Thomas wandered to Eli's room. The door was open. The lamp on the desk buzzed faintly. Papers were scattered, drawings, scribbles, half-finished notes in that uneven pencil script Eli had worked so hard to improve. And then, on the wall above his bed, Thomas saw it. Written in thick, crooked letters, the graphite almost smudged from the pressure of a small hand. "If you don't trust anyone, who's going to help me fly?" Thomas froze. The words weren't neat. They weren't poetic. But they landed in his chest like a stone dropped in still water. He sank into the chair by the bed, hands trembling, eyes locked on that single line. This wasn't about Rachel. It never had been. This was about a boy who had finally begun to believe in something, someone. And a father who had taken that away out of fear. Thomas had spent his life calculating risk, predicting outcomes, preparing for worst-case scenarios. But he hadn't prepared for this. Not for the moment his son stopped believing someone could lift him. Not in body, but in spirit. And sitting there, in the quiet hum of his son's dimly lit room, Thomas realized. The problem had never been Eli's legs. It was the world that had made him feel unworthy of being carried. And it was Thomas's job now, to make that right. Thomas found her at the community rehab center on the edge of town, a modest brick building surrounded by overgrown grass and a cracked parking lot. Inside, laughter echoed faintly from a back room. Not the kind of laughter you hear at fancy galas or corporate events. This was real. Rooted. The kind that blooms in places where healing has no price tag. Through the glass window of the gym he saw her, Rachel, crouched beside a boy with cerebral palsy, guiding his arm as he tried to reach a phone block. Her sleeves were rolled up, hair pulled back, eyes focused, patient. She hadn't seen him yet. Thomas stood for a while, just watching. Something about her presence here made everything feel smaller, simpler. He didn't see a waitress. He didn't see a therapist. He saw the woman who had carried his son, not with muscle but with grace. Not because she had to, but because she believed he was worth it. When she finally noticed him, she didn't look surprised. Just calm. "I figured you'd come eventually," she said softly. Thomas nodded, his voice caught somewhere between apology and awe. "I was wrong," he said. "About you. About everything." Rachel didn't speak. She waited. He continued, slower this time. "You didn't just lift my son. You lifted something I didn't even know needed lifting. His sense of self. His belief that someone could hold him and not see a burden." Rachel looked away for a moment, blinking, then turned back. "He believed in me. That was all I needed." Thomas stepped closer. "I want to do more than say thank you." And that's when he told her about the idea. Project Uplift. A program designed not to replace specialists, but to complement them. To teach families, neighbors, school aides, even strangers, how to lift, support and care for children with disabilities with respect, dignity and skill. "I want you to lead it with me," he said. "Not because of your title. But because you understand something too many people forget, that lifting isn't just emotion. It's a message." Rachel didn't answer right away. But when she looked back at him, there was something shining behind her quiet resolve. "I'm in," she said. "But only if the first session starts with parents." "Agreed," he smiled. Weeks later, at the launch of Project Uplift, the auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation. Families filled the chairs, some with children in wheelchairs, some with kids on crutches or curled up close to a parent's arm. On stage, Thomas spoke first, then stepped aside. And then Eli rolled forward. He held no notes. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice, when it came, was clear. "She didn't make me fly," he said. "But she made me feel like I could." The room fell silent. And then applause rose, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from souls who've been waiting for someone to say exactly what they feel. Rachel stood behind him, eyes glistening. In that moment, it was clear. She hadn't just changed one boy's life. She'd reminded a whole room of people that being lifted the right way could teach you how to rise on your own. If you believe that lifting someone the right way doesn't just change their posture, but can change the course of their life, go ahead and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD, where every week, we bring you true stories that remind us all of the quiet power of kindness. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. We'll see you next time.